Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 42. Stability Rules in the Infinite Tree. Remember the language we are learning together. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to one of the deepest echoes in this language. Our ascent through the language of identity has brought us to a high vantage point. We began Episode 7 by understanding how the single field phi speaks through its core alphabet of change: omega in time, k in space, and v in motion. We saw how these letters form stable words, which we experience as the identities that endure in our universe. We then explored the three pillars of that endurance. We met the temporal fingerprint, the rhythm that allows something to remain itself through time. We met the spatial signature, the shape that allows something to remain itself in space. We met the kinematic handwriting, the characteristic way that an identity moves. In other words, we have met the main characters in the universe's story, and we have learned to recognize them by their rhythms, their forms, and their journeys. Now we are ready for the deepest question of this book. Why do these specific patterns last? Out of all the possible combinations of derivatives in the infinite tree, why do only some become stable identities while others dissolve into noise? What hidden law in the language allows some sentences written in phi to hold together, while most flicker and vanish almost as soon as they appear? Today, we reach the capstone of this part of the journey. We explore the stability rules in the infinite tree. This is where we learn that the universe is not just speaking a language, it is speaking a language with a strict but beautiful grammar. A grammar that allows only certain words and sentences to be spoken aloud for any meaningful length of time. To feel this more clearly, imagine a vast library containing every possible book. Every sequence of letters, from pure gibberish to perfect poetry, is somewhere in this library. Most of the books are nonsense, their pages filled with random characters that never settle into meaning. A tiny fraction are readable stories. An even smaller fraction are timeless works that people return to again and again, passing them through generations. The holophase field, in its infinite potential, is like that library. It can, in principle, explore every possible pattern of derivatives. Most are chaotic, short-lived ripples that appear and vanish. But some patterns, such as a planet's orbit, a crystal's lattice, a heartbeat, a galaxy, persist for long times. They are like classics in the cosmic library. Our question is simple to state and profound in depth. What makes a classic? In the language of phi, what is the difference between a fleeting typo and an enduring word? Why does one pattern of derivatives burn itself out almost instantly, while another holds together for billions of years? The answer lies not in any single letter, but in the relationships between all the letters across the infinite derivative tree. Stability is not a property of one derivative taken in isolation, it is a property of the whole sentence, from its first temporal and spatial derivatives all the way up to the finest nuances of change. It belongs to the grammar that binds the entire tree together. In the Holophase model, the central proposal is simple but radical. An identity is a stable solution to the complete set of constraint chains that link every derivative of phi to every other. You can think of this as a vast multidimensional crossword puzzle. Each derivative, omega, alpha, k, curvature, v, acceleration, jerk, shear, and so on, is a clue. The constraint chains, the physical laws, the dispersion relations, the equations of motion are the rules of the puzzle. They tell you how answers in one direction must intersect answers in another. A stable identity is like a completed crossword where every word agrees with every crossing and none of the clues are violated. Most attempts to fill the grid fail. A random guess may satisfy a few local rules, but eventually runs into a contradiction. In the language of phi, these are the short-lived patterns that cannot satisfy all the constraints at once. They flare up and fade away. A truly stable identity is a pattern that satisfies the entire puzzle, all the way up and all the way down the derivative tree, without causing contradictions and without blowing up into infinity. This grammar of stability shows itself most clearly when we look again through our three familiar windows: time, space, and motion. Temporal stability is about the rhythm that can sustain itself. Spatial stability is about the shape that holds together. Motion stability is about the journey that maintains its character. In each domain, we can see local rules, and then we can see how they have to interlock. A pattern is temporally stable if its sequence of time derivatives, omega, alpha, jerk, snap, and all the higher rates, forms a coherent and bounded story. An explosion, for instance, involves runaway behavior. Certain derivatives become very large, and the pattern quickly destroys the structure that generated it. A pendulum swing, by contrast, is a loop. The derivatives repeat in a regular and predictable way. The pattern is temporally stable because it either repeats, settles into a steady state, or evolves within a bounded family of possibilities. A pattern is spatially stable if its configuration of spatial derivatives, gradients, curvatures, shears, twists, and higher nuances is in a state of balanced tension. A soap bubble forms a sphere because this shape minimizes the surface area for a given volume. If you poke it gently and deform it, surface tension pulls it back toward the sphere. The spatial derivatives are arranged in such a way that any small deviation is resisted. A very sharp needle point, by contrast, concentrates curvature into a tiny region. Under wear and diffusion, it tends to smooth out. That extreme spatial pattern is less stable. A pattern is motion stable if its kinematic handwriting, its continuous story of velocities, accelerations, jerks, and path curvatures, is self-consistent with the constraint chains that link motion to time and space. A satellite in a modest circular orbit is motion stable. If you give it a small nudge, it will usually move to a slightly different but still bounded path. A pencil balancing on its tip is motion unstable. The tiniest disturbance grows rapidly into a completely different motion pattern, the pencil falling and lying flat. All of this would already be interesting, but the halt of the holophase view is that true stability requires all three aspects at once. A temporal rhythm must be carried by a spatial instrument that can sustain it, and the resulting motion must be consistent with the grammar of the environment. A heartbeat, for example, is meaningful identity only because its temporal rhythm, its spatial form, and its motion of blood all form one coherent solution. Identity is a tri-unity of stability. We can now look at some concrete examples of stable phi sentences. A hydrogen atom is one of the most exquisite examples of holistic stability we know. In the holophase view, its identity is a specific bound pattern in the electron's field, which we can think of as part of the big phi field. Temporally, the electron's phase evolution is perfectly regular. It has a fixed energy level, so its temporal derivative has a simple, constant pattern. Spatially, the electron's wave pattern forms a standing shape, an orbital, such as a spherical cloud in the ground state. This shape is a solution that minimizes a certain energy tally for the given conditions. Kinematically, the probability cloud is not racing around or breaking apart. On average, it is static and bound. When you put all of this together, you have a stable identity that can persist for immense times. Consider the great red spot on Jupiter, the enormous storm that has persisted for centuries. Temporally, it has a roughly steady rotation period, a rhythm in how it turns. Spatially, it maintains a recognizable oval shape and a coherent internal structure, despite the surrounding turbulence. In motion, it is a coherent vortex, moving slowly relative to the planet, but keeping its internal rotation pattern. It is a stable solution of the nonlinear fluid equations that govern Jupiter's atmosphere. A standing wave in a guitar string is another clear example. When you first plug the string, you excite many patterns at once. Most of the messy initial disturbance decays quickly into transient noise. What remains are the standing modes, the fundamental pitch and its harmonics. Each standing mode is temporally stable in the sense that it oscillates at a well-defined frequency. It is spatially stable in the sense that the shape of the string, with its fixed nodes and antinodes, repeats in time. And it is motion stable because energy moves back and forth between potential and kinetic forms in a regular way without the pattern flying apart. These modes are the allowed words in the language of that string. Behind these examples stand two structural features of the holophase language that act as guardians of stability. The first is the presence of quadratic balances. Across physics, stable patterns often minimize or balance certain tallies that are quadratic in the derivatives, such as sums of squares. A soap film minimizes an area tally that depends on curvature. A light ray takes a path that minimizes travel time. A planet's orbit minimizes an action tally in a certain sense. In the holophase view, these tallies are ways of counting how intensely phi is changing in different ways. Stability emerges when a pattern finds a harmonious balance between competing tallies, a kind of least effort configuration given the constraints. The second guardian is the network of constraint chains, the grammatical rules themselves. These are the equations that link derivatives together, such as Newton's laws, Maxwell's equations, the Schrödinger equation, nonlinear wave equations, and many others. They are the syntax of the language. They tell us that if phi bends in a certain way in space, it must accelerate in a certain way in time. A stable identity is a pattern that satisfies all these chains simultaneously, not just at one moment, but across its whole life. If you'd like to see the detailed mathematics behind these ideas, you can search for the word holophase on Zenodo. There you will find the scientific papers that this audio journey is built on. There, the stability rules are written in equations instead of stories. Stability cannot be understood in one dimension alone. It is the triunity in its most concentrated form. A stable identity has a temporal echo, an enduring rhythm whose time derivatives are bounded and coherent. It has a spatial echo, a coherent shape whose spatial derivatives avoid fragmentation and pathological sharpness. It has a motion echo, a resilient trajectory that remains within a stable family of paths when lightly disturbed. Whenever you attempt to hold stability in only one or two of these echoes, the identity collapses. A beautiful shape that exists for a tiny fraction of a second is not stable in the full sense. A rhythm with no spatial structure is like a ghost signal. A trajectory that shatters upon the slightest contact is too fragile to count as a genuine identity. True stability is the threefold braid holding tight. In the master tree, this concept is the capstone of the entire identities tower. It sits at the top of the columns for temporal identity, spatial identity, and propagation identity. It depends on everything below it, the core alphabet of phi, the towers of nuance that refined our understanding of time, space, and motion, and the earlier principles of semantic stability. It is not a new kind of derivative. It is a meta-rule that governs which combinations of all derivatives are allowed to be persistent identities in the first place. This brings us to the semantic meaning of these stability rules. They are the universe's criteria for which stories are worth telling for longer than an instant. The holophase field is like an endlessly creative poet. It is constantly composing patterns, but only some of those patterns have the structural integrity to persist. The stability rules are like poetic forms, such as the structure of a sonnet or a haiku, that encode constraints on rhythm and rhyme. Verses that obey these forms can be repeated, remembered, and passed on. Verses that violate them fall apart. In this sense, stability rules answer a heavy question in a very concrete way. What has the right to exist as a persistent entity? Not in a mystical or moral sense, but in a grammatical sense. An identity earns its right to exist by satisfying the syntactic and semantic rules of the cosmic language across all dimensions of expression. You can feel this principle even in your everyday experience. Think of all the ideas, projects, and relationships that appear briefly in your life and then fade. Some plans feel exciting for a moment, but have no structure to support them. They are like noisy patterns in phi that do not satisfy any deep stability rule. They flare up as possibilities and then disappear. Other projects, habits, and relationships slowly find the rhythm, a shared understanding, and a workable structure. Over time, they become part of the stable backbone of your life. The same is true on every scale, from the microscopic dynamics of atoms to the macroscopic dynamics of societies. Stability rules are always quietly at work, selecting which patterns can carry on and which will be edited out by reality. Seen this way, the Holophase grammar offers a unifying lens. Instead of treating the stability of atoms, bridges, ecosystems, and personal routines as completely separate topics, we can see them all as different faces of the same underlying story. The search for configurations of phi that satisfy enough constraint chains and balance enough tallies that they can persist. The details differ, but the logic is the same. Stability is not an accident. It is the natural outcome of patterns that manage to solve the infinite crossword puzzle well enough to avoid immediate collapse. This also reshapes how we think about change. Instability is not always a failure. It is often the pathway by which an unstable pattern gives way to a more stable one. A falling pencil does not simply cease to be. It transitions from an impossible, finely tuned state balanced on its tip to a robust state lying on its side. Likewise, a supersaturated solution that suddenly crystallizes is moving from a fragile, metastable configuration into a new, more stable arrangement of molecules. In the holophase view, evolution, growth, learning, and even cultural transformation can all be seen as journeys through the stability landscape of the infinite tree, where unstable patterns are pruned away and more coherent patterns rise to prominence. These ideas are also strongly testable. There is a spectrum of stability. Some identities are strongly stable, like a hydrogen atom in its ground state, which returns to its preferred configuration after small disturbances. Some are metastable, like a supersaturated solution that may sit quietly for a long time until a small seed triggers a sudden crystallization, or like a ball resting in a shallow hollow that can be dislodged by a large enough push. Some are unstable, like a pencil balanced on its tip, which cannot survive even the smallest perturbation. The holophase framework predicts that all persistent identities we observe fall somewhere on this stability spectrum, and that their behavior can be understood in terms of the underlying constraint chains. Metastability is especially important because so much of the world we care about lives in this middle zone. A living cell is not in a perfectly stable resting state. It constantly consumes energy to maintain itself far from thermal equilibrium. A society is not locked forever into one configuration. It maintains a rough order through laws, norms, and institutions, all of which can be stressed and sometimes transformed. Even your own psychological patterns are often metastable. You may function well most of the time, but under enough pressure, your inner patterns can reorganize. In all of these cases, the identity is like a marble, resting in a shallow valley on a hilly landscape. Small nudges are absorbed and corrected by feedback loops, but a large enough shove can push the marble over a ridge into a new valley, a new identity. From a holophase perspective, what we call phase transitions, tipping points, breakthroughs, and collapses are all examples of the same deeper phenomenon. The underlying constraint chains and quadratic balances are being rearranged so that one pattern of stability gives way to another. Sometimes this happens smoothly, as in the gradual melting of ice into water as temperature rises. Sometimes it happens catastrophically, as in the sudden collapse of a bridge that has accumulated hidden stresses. By learning to read the stability landscape in many domains, we gain a new intuition for where systems are robust, where they are fragile, and where small actions might trigger large transformations. For example, consider a neutron star. an ultra-dense sphere of neutrons roughly the size of a city. Its existence depends on a delicate balance between gravity, which tries to collapse it, and quantum forces that resist compression. The relevant constraint chains include general relativity for gravity and nuclear physics for the behavior of dense matter. From these chains, physicists can calculate a maximum stable mass. If a neutron star exceeds this mass, no stable configuration is possible. It must collapse into a black hole. Observations of real neutron stars show masses clustered below this theoretical limit, supporting the idea that their stability is indeed governed by such rules. The cosmos all around us is a living testament to stability rules. In physics, we see stable orbits, solitons in water and light, and specific spatial modes in laser beams. In chemistry, we see the periodic table as the catalog of stable atomic configurations and protein folding as the search for stable shapes in a complex energy landscape. In biology, we see homeostasis as dynamic stability maintained by feedback loops, and ecosystems as metastable configurations of species and resources. In geology, we see ancient continental cores that have survived for billions of years because their structure is stable within the planet's tectonic grammar. Human life and society are also built on stability rules. Engineers design arches, bridges, and skyscrapers as stable solutions of structural constraint chains. Control systems, such as autopilots and thermostats, use feedback rules to keep variables within desired ranges. Legal systems act as constraint chains for social behavior, aiming to produce a stable society. Economies seek, sometimes unsuccessfully, to maintain forms of equilibrium. Grammar in language acts as a stability rule for meaning, making sure sentences can be understood. Even personal habits are behavioral stability patterns that minimize mental and physical effort under life's constraints. You can train yourself to see stability in the world around you. Look at a spiderweb glistening in the morning. Each thread is under tension, and the whole structure is a balance of forces. A gentle breeze makes it sway, but it returns to its form. Tap a wine glass and listen to the clear ringing tone. That note is a stable vibrational mode of the glass. The glass has passed the universe's test for a stable pattern at that frequency. Watch a flock of birds turning in the sky. Disturbances ripple through the flock, but the flock reforms into a coherent whole. You are watching dynamic stability expressed through collective rules. You can also perform a simple hands-on experiment. Build a small arch from wooden blocks or smooth stones without using any glue. Carefully lean each piece against the next until the keystone locks the structure. When the arch stands, step back and look. The weight of each block is channeled through the curve into the ground in a way that holds the whole together. A small tap may make it wobble, but it settles back. Remove the keystone, and the structure collapses into a pile. In that moment, you are seeing a stability rule made visible. The arch is not just a shape, it is the physical manifestation of a balanced pattern in the derivatives of force. We have now reached the summit of this book. We have seen how the one field phi, through its infinite tree of derivatives, speaks a language. We have discovered that this language has a deep grammar, stability rules that allow only certain combinations of derivatives to echo long enough to become the persistent identities of our world, the rhythms, the shapes, and the journeys. The entire language, phi and its derivatives, is the reality we are learning to read. In this episode, we have climbed from the phonetic alphabet of derivative letters to the poetic rules that govern the enduring verses of the cosmos. As always, we return to the source. The stability rules are not imposed from outside. They are the inherent logic of phi's self-interaction, written in the language of its derivatives. They are how the field's endless creativity is channeled into enduring form. A stable identity is like a harmonious chord struck in the field, a chord whose harmonic relationships across the entire spectrum of derivatives are so well tuned that they sustain themselves against the background noise. With this understanding, we close this book on how the language creates stable entities. We now possess a complete picture of the what and the how. In the next part of our journey, we will ask a new question, not just how identities are formed, but what their existence means. We will see that time, space, and motion themselves are not blank stages, but layers of active, participatory meaning. This will be the beginning of the next book, where we explore dimensional semanticity. As we conclude, let a final thought resonate. The cosmos is a conversation in stable verse. Every enduring thing, every atom, every star, every ecosystem, every mind, is a well-formed sentence that has passed the universe's grammatical test. It is a story that holds together, whose beginning, middle, and end are in coherent relation across scales of time, space, and motion. You are one such sentence, astoundingly complex and dynamically stable, written in the living language of Phi. Your persistence, your form, and your journey are maintained by the exquisite balance of countless derivative relationships, all obeying the deep stability rules of the whole. To understand these stability rules is to understand that existence itself is an achievement of coherence. To be is to have solved, moment by moment, the infinite puzzle of the self. To live is to be a stable, meaningful word spoken aloud in the ongoing story of the Holophase. Now, feel your own stability, your heartbeat, your breath, your conscious presence. You are hearing yourself spoken as a stable verse in the language of everything. You are a remarkably coherent pattern sustained by countless balances. Peace be upon you.